Hey everyone, welcome! Today we're diving into an absolutely epic story. We're talking 50,000 years of history about the people who first called America home. We're going to explore incredible civilizations, a collision of worlds, and a fight for survival and sovereignty that's still going on. So let's start with the most basic question of all. Who were the first Americans? I mean, really, who were they? To answer that, we have to rewind the clock way, way back, long before any European ships were even dreaming about crossing the Atlantic. And we're not talking about a story that spans a few centuries. This is a story of millennia. It kicks off late in the Ice Age, when humans walked across the Bering Land Bridge, a stretch of land that connected Siberia and Alaska. From there, their descendants just spread out, and by around 1000 BC, they had settled almost the entire continent. That perspective is so important, right? American history goes so much deeper than most of us ever learn. So, what did this continent actually look like before 1492? Well, for one thing, it was anything but empty. This was a continent that was just teeming with all kinds of diverse and complex civilizations. I mean, over thousands and thousands of years, these societies absolutely flourished. They came up with hundreds of distinct languages and cultures. They completely mastered agriculture. Think corn, squash, all those staples. They even domesticated animals like turkeys. These people were innovators, building these massive mound cities and developing super efficient ways to hunt and fish. And let's be really clear about the scale we're talking about here. You have to forget any of those old, outdated images of some sparse, empty wilderness. No way. Their cities were as big and as complex as the cities you would have found in Europe or Asia at the exact same time. These were major hubs of government and culture with incredible architecture. And then 1492 happened. And this was so much more than just two groups of people meeting. It was a world-altering encounter that would completely and forever change the course of history, not just for people in the Americas, but for people on the other side of the Atlantic too. This moment kicked off something that historians now call the Columbian Exchange. And really, it was just this massive, two-way transfer of everything you can imagine. Plants, animals, technology, ideas. They all started flowing back and forth between the Old World and the New World. And this exchange definitely went both ways. Europe was completely transformed by crops from the Americas, like potatoes and corn. The Americas got things like wheat, cattle, and of course, the horse, which would totally revolutionize life on the Great Plains. But the Old World also brought something else, something unintentional and so much deadlier. Diseases. You see, Native Americans had never been exposed to Old World diseases like measles and smallpox, so they had zero immunity. And the impact was, it was nothing short of catastrophic. Historians are really clear on this point. Disease was the single biggest reason for the population collapse that happened after the Europeans arrived. So, this devastating loss of life really set the stage for the next major chapter of the story, a growing conflict over the land itself. As European colonies started to expand and the United States was eventually formed, that push westward just got more and more intense. Now, U.S. policy toward Native Americans was always changing. At first, it was about making treaties to buy land, an idea that people like George Washington actually supported, but that pretty quickly morphed into this idea of a civilizing process, and then finally into a brutal policy of just forced removal. The absolute peak of this policy was the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which President Andrew Jackson signed into law. This law basically gave the government the green light to forcibly move tribes from their ancestral homes in the Southeast. And that forced march became known as the Trail of Tears, a complete tragedy where thousands of men, women, and children died along the way. Well, as you can imagine, this expansion was met with a lot of resistance, and that sparked a whole century of brutal, violent conflicts that we now call the Indian Wars. This entire era of warfare came to a really tragic end in 1890 at a place called Wounded Knee, where U.S. troops killed hundreds of Lakota people, including women and children. The end of the Indian Wars, that marks a totally new chapter in this story. The fight wasn't happening as much on the battlefield anymore. Instead, it moved into the political and social arenas. It became this long, incredibly difficult struggle for basic recognition and rights. The path to simply becoming citizens in their own land was so slow, and every step was hard-won. A huge turning point was World War I. In 1919, as a way of recognizing their military service, the government finally granted citizenship to all Native American veterans. Then, just 5 years after that, the Indian Citizenship Act extended that right to all Native Americans born in the U.S. And their contribution was really significant. About 10,000 Native American men served in World War I. When you think about their total population at the time, that number is huge. It just shows this powerful commitment to a country that hadn't even recognized them as full citizens yet. But here's the thing, right? A law written down on paper doesn't just instantly change how things work on the ground. For decades, even after gaining citizenship, many Native Americans were still blocked from voting because of local laws and all sorts of discriminatory practices. The fight for equal rights was nowhere near over. And that brings us all the way to the present day, to what you could call the unfinished chapter of this story. Because all the history we've just talked about continues to shape the lives and the legal status of Native Americans today. So today, basic fundamental rights like the right to vote or run for office, those are secure, but there are still these major, really complex issues that remain. At the core of it all are these controversies about the exact relationship between the federal government and tribal nations and how to protect cultural practices. And that leads us to the central question for our time. Okay, citizenship was granted, but what does sovereignty actually mean today? The right of tribal nations to govern themselves, to define their own futures, that remains one of the most vital and complicated issues in America. It's a question that really echoes through all 50,000 years of this incredible history.